Hey everybody, it's Chance from Geeking Out About It. Sam and Austin have asked me to come here to my house to talk about my favorite Marvel character with a theme song composed by Black Sabbath. Not a whole lot of options there, so we're gonna go with Iron Man. Tony Stark, everybody's favorite
Genius,
genius, billionaire,
billionaire, playboy,
playboy,
philanthropist.
philanthropist, better known as Iron Man, made his first debut in 1963 with Tales of Suspense number 39. 5 years later, in May of 1968, he would launch his own series with the release of Iron Man number 1. The inventive nature of Iron Man and Tony Stark's metal suits and weapons technology was originally created for Stan Lee to explore themes of the Cold War and the weapons race between the United States and the Soviet Union. In particular, Stan Lee wanted to explore the role of American technology in the fight against the spread of communism. Tony Stark was also a pretty deep comic book character, especially for the time. Many of the arcs in his comics revolved around dark themes, such as his alcoholism in Demon in a Bottle, which released in 1979. But, dirty little secret here, I've only actually read like 2 Iron Man comics, so the rest of this video is just going to be about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Cool? Cool. Let's get started. The story of Tony Stark in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a story of redemption and self-improvement. Now, maybe it's because he's been in like 9 of the 23 movies, but Tony definitely has the clearest defined arc throughout the series. With Iron Man 1 in 2008, we see Tony Stark at his absolute peak. He's the womanizing billionaire weapons salesman who couldn't care less about what effects his work has until it all comes crashing down around him. We see him get struck in the chest with shrapnel from one of his own missiles and nearly bleeding out, which leads to his arc reactor having to be placed in his chest in order to keep it from getting to his heart. When he's kidnapped by terrorists in the cave, he sees the devastating effects of what he sells as the Merchant of Death. When this movie came out in 2008, I was 7 years old. Everything about this movie was spectacular to me then, and still is now. I loved seeing the creativity of Tony Stark building his own suits when he builds the Mark I in the cave, and then after he gets back to America and he's still tinkering in his garage, and he learns how to work with his own inventions and ends up smashing himself into a wall and crushing a several $1 million sports car. And of course, for me, the grand payoff of all of his tinkering and inventing in the garage is that first moment where we the audience get to fly with Tony Stark. We get to fly through the night sky with Iron Man, seeing things from his point of view, and we can feel the night air. Part of why this movie still holds up is that it's purely an Iron Man movie. At the time when it was made, Marvel Studios was a small, independent studio. Disney hadn't purchased them yet, and frankly, people had no idea this movie was going to be successful. It was going to be going up against The Dark Knight, which would release in July, and that famous end credits scene with Nick Fury talking about the Avengers Initiative was almost scrapped from the movie entirely. Also, props to Jon Favreau for writing himself a character and sneaking himself into one of the biggest pop culture franchises of all time. That was a very smart move, John. It's for this reason that Iron Man 1 is still one of my top 5 MCU films. It was so fresh at the time. It was so electrifying to watch. No, not like that. Oh, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, fine. We can talk about Iron Man 2. Well, it happened. This movie served more as a way to introduce Black Widow and S.H.I.E.L.D. into the cinematic universe rather than an Iron Man movie, and I think it suffers overall because of that. I find this movie to be very forgettable on multiple rewatches of the MCU, and the plot is also spread very thin. We see the development of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Black Widow. We're introduced to Howard Stark and kind of his legacy as it relates to Tony, as well as Tony's own personal arc throughout the film, when his arc reactor is slowly poisoning him. It's just kind of a mess, but you do get that suitcase Iron Man suit up at the racetrack, and that is excellent. However, despite all the flaws with Iron Man 2, it does play a big part in setting up the events of the Avengers. The Avengers is one of the defining movies for Tony Stark as a character. Specifically at the end, when Tony Stark, the man who we've seen time and time again to just be kind of a self-centered ass, we see him sacrifice himself when he rides that nuclear missile away from Manhattan through the portal to the other side of space. And granted, he does make it through and come back at the end, but in that moment, Tony Stark is fully willing to sacrifice himself to save the world. Tony's trauma and anxiety after the Battle of New York plays a major part in Iron Man 3. Now, this is an unpopular opinion, but I actually love this movie. I'm not crazy about the Mandarin or Adrian Killian, but I think it's a great character study of Tony Stark, and it gives a lot of character development to him as well. It picks up about 6 months after the Battle of New York, so all those events are still pretty fresh in Tony's mind. We see that in the beginning of this film. Tony is traumatized. He has crippling anxiety attacks. And that's a major theme of the film, because we see this duality between the invincible Iron Man and the damaged, scared Tony Stark behind the mask. Honestly, there is a kind of a lack of Iron Man in this movie, but there is a lot of Tony Stark, and we get to see a lot of that inventive nature that I loved so much about the first film. Specifically, the sequence where Tony is breaking into the mansion and he's just using his own little gadgets, like not a full Iron Man suit. And it's very big MacGyver vibes, and I'm a big fan. Tony's trauma after the Battle of New York and his realization that even Earth's mightiest heroes were barely able to keep the invasion at bay is a major theme that Tony carries throughout the rest of the MCU. It's what leads to him wanting to create Ultron as a way to protect the world. And of course, Ultron leads to the events in Sokovia, which leads to the signing of the Sokovia Accords, causing the civil war between Cap and Tony. And Tony carries this guilt and this trauma, this kind of fear throughout the series, and it's one of the most interesting parts of his character. I think that's why Iron Man has always resonated with me, why he's been my favorite superhero since I was in first grade. He's been so strongly characterized as someone who can't always help himself, but he has the means, he has the power, the technology, and the money in order to help others. And he does this time and time again. Nobody's making him. He's got enough money, he could spend the rest of his life doing whatever he wants. But Tony makes the choice to don his iron suit and to fight for what's right. At any point, he could just go back to living it up in Malibu, but despite his flaws, Tony Stark has a heart of gold. No, heart of iron. Thank you for watching, and keep an eye out for more geek favorites coming soon this week. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out more Geeking Out About It, as well as other KBVR TV content. Also, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we post tons of behind the scenes and extra content.